Most Aristocrats share this common problem, their social detachment from the general populace they claimed to represent. At the root of their influence were wealthy whites, and at the root of their feelings about the average so-called Negro was arrogant antipathy, no different than the attitude taken by their white masters. After all, this class of Negroes were the privileged children of white slave masters, all of a sudden turned champion for black rights. The air of insincerity permeated this bunch. With all this being said, there were some who made it into politics without completely alienating themselves from the average person. And all Freemasons played this vital role within black communities, being far more well-connected to the pulse of the people through the church, as opposed to education. Establishing a solid base among the indigenous, who weren't seen as privileged or elite.
I would often ask individuals about some of the high-profile celebrities. So, for example, when I was in Philadelphia, I would ask people, was Bill Cosby a member of the black upper class in Philadelphia? And almost uniformly, these old families said, absolutely not. He's an entertainer. So that was another aspect that I found within this group, was that they didn't like entertainers. They didn't like people who had made money through sports. They wanted people as a part of their group who had gotten money through medicine, through law, through business. So it was a very, very exclusive group, and I mean that in every sense of the word, where they were quick to exclude anyone who they felt was new. And since you folks are from the D.C. area, you know in Washington you are new, at least among this community, if you have not been here for 3 or 4 generations.
Hiram Revels of North Carolina was a barber, AME minister, college president, soldier, recruiter, Freemason, and the first Negro to be elected to Congress. Revels was born free to ancestors who were Croatoan Indians, and his mother apparently of some Scottish ancestry. He claimed his ancestors had always been free, as far back as his knowledge extended. Revels lived a well-traveled life in his early years, first traveling to Indiana to study at Beech Grove Quaker Seminary, then to Drake Seminary in Ohio before being ordained at 18 years old, becoming an AME minister. Hiram was elected to the Regional Elder Council by the age of 22. Quote from House.gov. Revels traveled throughout the country carrying out religious work and educating fellow African Americans in Indiana, Illinois, Kansas, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Although Missouri forbade free blacks to live in the state for fear they would instigate uprisings, Revels took a pastorate with an AME church in St. Louis in 1853. Noting that the law was seldom enforced, however, Revels later revealed that he had to be careful because of restrictions on his movements. I seditiously refrained from doing anything that would incite slaves to run away from their masters, he recalled. It being understood that my object was to preach the gospel to them and improve their moral and spiritual condition, even slaveholders were tolerant of me. Despite his cautiousness, Revels was imprisoned for preaching to the black community in 1854. Upon his release, he accepted a position with the Presbyterian Church in Baltimore, Maryland, working alongside his brother Willis Revels, also an AME pastor. Hiram Revels was the principal of a black school in Baltimore and subsequently attended Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, on a scholarship from 1855 to 1857. He was one of the few black men in the United States with at least some college education. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, Revels helped recruit 2 black regiments from Maryland. In 1862, when black soldiers were permitted to fight, he served as the chaplain for a black regiment in campaigns in Vicksburg and Jackson, Mississippi. In 1863, Revels returned to St. Louis, where he established a freedmen's school. At the end of hostilities, Revels served in a church in Leavenworth, Kansas. While traveling to Kansas, Revel and his family were asked to sit in the smoking car rather than the car for first-class ticket holders. Revels protested that the language in the smoking car was too coarse for his wife and children, and the conductor finally relented. Revels served in churches in Louisville, Kentucky, and New Orleans, Louisiana, before settling in Natchez, Mississippi in 1866. Before the Civil War, fewer than 1,000 free black Mississippians had access to basic education. Thus, leadership from freedmen such as Revels became vital to the Republican Party for rallying the new electorate in the post-war years. It was through his work in education that Revels became involved in politics, taking his first elected position as a Natchez alderman in 1868. He entered politics reluctantly, fearing racial friction and interference with his religious work. But he quickly won over blacks and whites with his moderate and compassionate political opinions. In 1869, encouraged to run by a friend, future Representative John Roy Lynch, Revels won a seat in the Mississippi House Senate. Under the newly installed Reconstruction government, Revels was one of more than 30 African Americans among the state's 140 legislators. Upon his election, he wrote a friend in Leavenworth, Kansas, "We are in the midst of an exciting canvass. I am working very hard in politics as well in other matters. We are determined that Mississippi shall be settled on the basis of justice and political and legal equality." A little-known politician, Revels attracted the attention of fellow legislators when he gave a moving prayer on the opening day of the session. With mixed results, Revels also promoted black American civil rights by less conventional means. In May 1870, he startled the military establishment when he nominated black candidate Michael Howard to the U.S. Army Military Academy at West Point, a long bastion of Southern white gentlemen. Revels knew Howard's parents, former slaves, and Howard's father had served in the state legislature. Critics claimed Revels callously and publicly humiliated the youth, who had little formal education and was not admitted to West Point, and supporters claimed the school's administration's prejudice had blocked Howard's entrance. Additionally, Revels successfully appealed to the War Department on behalf of black mechanics from Baltimore who were barred from working at the U.S. Navy Yard in early 1871, an accomplishment he recalled with great pride. End quote. Revels lived in the spotlight for several decades, acquiring status and influence. But over his time in politics, his popularity began to wane as a result of his support of the Democratic Party, who were notorious in committing election violence against black voters. During a Senate hearing, Revels testified to not having any knowledge of any violence used against black voters during the 1875 election campaign. Whether his statements were true or not, his denial of voter violence didn't sit well with his constituency. Hiram Revels is one of the most notable Prince Hall Freemasons in American history.
Birthplace of a branch of Masonry that seeks to refute the tired old allegation that the order is only for tired old white men. We are entering a room that echoes with the history of American oppression and liberation. Prince Hall Lodge, named for a Revolutionary War soldier from Massachusetts, founder of what remains a separate, self-segregated offshoot of the Masonic family tree.
And constantly people would say things like, "Oh no, she's not our kind of people, or no, he's not our kind of people, because this group very firmly knew who was in and who was not. So, and they even knew who had married in and who had been born in. So as I discovered that the black upper class as it defines itself is not that different from how different segments of the white upper class defines itself. Who's been around a long time, who's new to the community, who earned their money in a way that we accept, and who's earned money in a way that we don't accept.
No beginning, there